I'm going to call the June 5th, 2024 meeting of the Municipal Building Commission to order. And for the record, we have Terry DeSisto, Ed Stanton, Jackie Romanicki, Gail Clark, Jerry Freecott, and myself. That constitutes a quorum. And let's dispense at this point with minutes and bills and all sorts of other things in the water department, and we have the mayor here with us. Let's get right to the public safety presentation. So, because among other things, the Conservation Commission has this room at 6:30. And go ahead, Todd.
I will be as rapid and brief as possible. Again, I appreciate the city's patience and the committee's patience with us kind of bringing this full circle, to the final results. But to summarize, I'll go through pretty quickly. We all know the existing conditions, the buildings themselves, the two we're talking about, the fire headquarters, the police headquarters, are woefully past their useful life. It's just a quick summary. Our process began with conducting individual program needs assessments for each department. That resulted in about 70,000 square feet of PD space, about 58,000, 58 and a half, if you would, of fire department space. As two separate buildings, it totals out to about 128,500 square feet. And if we had the opportunity to do a combined, it would total down to about 107. We're able to combine and gain the efficiencies of some of the synergistic spaces. With that said, the synergistic spaces that we're looking for, the public areas, the shared spaces between the departments, kind of independent fire department spaces, decontamination, fire apparatus bay, and then specialty police operations. Just the get a little bit further into that, the zoning, fire department areas, just went through a little bit quicker. The public areas where we want to zone that there is that security, basically general public comes in, anything beyond that they're escorted. And then you have the operational spaces for the PD, and then the high security area, which is the detention area in the PD, down to the low side here. And this is just a generic floor plan. This isn't specific, just to kind of give overall highlight. The study went citywide. We looked at, even though there's only about 8 here, we looked at a total of about a dozen different sites, narrowed it down to pull through our assessment process, analytical, creating the database, if you would, reviewing each of those sites, coming up with the criteria that was important for all three, the city, the PD, and the FD, and resulting in basically 2 sites. The current headquarters site for the fire department, which is the existing fire department headquarters, as well as the Richardson School, 100 Union Street, and the Army Reserve training facility at 50 John Williams. The Union Street site offered one of the greatest areas of response relative to the highest amount of call volume. The ultimately it would be phased construction. Existing Richardson School would need to be demolished. The existing multifamily residence that's within that area, overall parcel, would remain, and the lot coverage and max building height of 2.5 stories. Ultimately, we would take the open area, the opportunity for the open area, construct the new apparatus bay, and then move into that location and construct what would be the new headquarters. Now, I will step back for a second and basically say that the plan that you see here would be the intent that a full headquarters, the administration, the bunk area, all of that would live here. And this is to purely show that that would fit on this site and be able to fully operate. The intent would be getting into the John Williams site there's the opportunity that the fire administration could go to that location with that substation that we were relocating, and potentially downsize the headquarters site. The property being located, so the John Williams, the property being located within an industrial zone. Due to the grade change, unable to provide vehicular access to the Thatcher Street site. Zoning information related to the district, non-restrictive setback requirements, easements through property may be present, lot coverage, max lot coverage of 50%, and the building height would be allowed to go up to 3 stories in that location. This plan here does show the overall footprint with the PD and the fire administration, as well as the substation that we were talking about potentially relocating to this. So this does kind of give you that example of how much that John Williams site can accommodate. The drive time maps were the next thing to confirm whether or not these properties worked. This John Williams site does pull that response, as we were talking about earlier, further into the city, taking the, just trying to remember the right term, I think it's Twin Village.
Yeah.
Property, which put a lot of that drive time and that response time out into Rehoboth, pulls it back into the city and allows that.
Seekonk, but.
Seekonk, yeah, Seekonk, Rehoboth.
If I remember what the fire chief said the last time we were together, was that at one time mutual aid was important, and that's why we have stations in South Attleboro, in Twin Village, and in Briggs Corner. That is no longer necessarily the driving force.
Correct.
And so moving the Twin Village station closer to downtown seemed like it had some advantages. First of all, it takes a facility that is not the best and replaces it. But secondly, one of the things I remember the chief saying is that part of the problem is that when vehicles leave the central station, then another station has to cover for that. And so there's a domino effect here. And so having that station closer to headquarters provides a better coverage map, if I understand correctly.
There is the possibility of that. It definitely, as you can see, the proximity between these two, it provides that better opportunity for coverage in such a fashion as a vehicle from headquarters is out and now they need to pull in that secondary coverage from what would be either the John Williams, the Park Street, or west, depending upon where that call is located. Correct. Okay, so next part of the whole process, so that was kind of a quick summary of where we're up to as of our last meeting, was developing the budget. So we went out to our professional estimator with their involvement, reviewing the drawings that were as of the last time we discussed, or we had the conversation. Ultimately, the total anticipated construction cost would be, for sake of a round figure conversation, about $104 million.
Is that for both buildings?
That would be, I wanted to put the caveat on it, that this was done as if both buildings were being done as one cohesive project. We didn't, until I looked at this and reviewed it earlier today, we didn't look at it as, well, if we did this as consecutively rolling projects, 2 separate projects, what would that impact be? So we can absolutely do a little bit additional homework and provide that information to you after this meeting. But as part of this, the understanding of the effort would be, this would be one contiguous project. That was the numbers that we provided here as part of the presentation.
And were you anticipating one contractor?
Yes, you could go that route, and there would be some potential savings in there. We're experiencing that with 2 other communities right now where they have ultimately a restructuring of their entire town-wide or city-wide services, and they got 2 projects going on at the same time. And in those projects, it's been about $1 million to $1.5 million savings for the project cost to put them underneath one individual contractor, because they can ultimately roll from project to project.
It also, though, limits your universe in some ways to contractors who can afford to.
It does.
And are qualified to build that big, right?
Yes. As the size of these projects, and we'll get into that further in the discussion, the size of your project here is one, you may want to consider going to a CMAR, Chapter 149A, Construction Management at Risk, which would put you into a realm where you're not dealing with a smaller group of contractors, you're actually dealing with a larger group of construction managers. So there's some
Well,
benefits.
as you know, the Attleboro High School, we went that route. It was the first time, and it was enormously successful, in my opinion.
Yes, and we're underway. We did that with Sharon Public Safety, a little bit smaller. Ventured the same avenue in Needham with the public safety, CMAR. A little bit better of an experience there, and we've got 2 projects, public safety wise, under construction right now, Quincy and Brockton, which are both highly motivated and, as of this point in time, very successful with the team effort going forward.
What does winter 2025 bid mean? Does that mean going out to bid in January to start next spring?
So we had to pick a start point that would ultimately, so that's the next part of the conversation. Thank you for picking up on that, Jack. Would be as if we were taking this process and tomorrow starting up on the next stage of developing the contract documents. We would be ready for a winter bid of 2025. So we do want to have that honest conversation where we're basically saying, if this delays to 26, you're adding about $4 million in escalation for 1 year's worth of hesitation, if you would, on the project. And then if you go to 27, it was an additional 8 on top of that 4.
So it's about $4 million a year for every year we delay.
No, 4
no,
plus
it was
12,
an additional 8.
12.
It would be plus 12 for 27.
So it looks
It compounds over
it
the
looks
years.
like they built in a 10% escalation cost for construction, and that's what that 9.1 million would be. And so escalation, like there's timing factors involved in the escalation factor. So they're saying they're probably padding that number a little bit to 25, and then saying if it was 1 more year after that, it's not an equivalent 10% escalation on top of the 10% that you carried.
It's right now we're seeing, barring the recent history of 22, we're seeing things kind of settle out at between 6 to 8% annually escalation, but it's a compounded. So if you gain 6% for 26, whatever that number is, you're going to gain another 6%. It's not a direct, 12% going to 2027.
And so if we were to start in the spring of 27, we would add 12 million, is that what you're saying?
About 12 million, yeah.
Okay, just want to understand the parameters that we're looking at.
Yep. No, I wanted to be forthcoming with the information because it's the honest fact of what we face any given day of the week.
This is just the first component of the cost estimate.
That's the construction cost. So we also want to build into that equipping, or that what we call the soft cost, which is 2 parts. The equipping cost, that's the every item that would fall out of the building, and then the indirect cost, that's your OPM, A&E fees, additional testing, and contingencies. So total, and this gives kind of that perspective, total project, what you would be seeking from the taxpayers to fund, ultimately is about 132 million, just again for round figures, for a 149 single project, or 142 for a 149A project.
Why would it be so much higher?
Because the added benefit of having the CMAR on early, and we would like to see them personally, we completed this with Beverly. The construction manager came on, I like to use the analogy of shortly after our ink had dried out on the design contract, the CMAR was brought on board early on, about mid-schematic design. The earlier they're involved, the more influential that they can be in that decision-making process of materials, construction phasing, site information, and they can be integral into some of the site investigation to gather that more accurate information.
Okay, but I guess I'm wondering why the CM at risk, if I'm reading this right, is $11 million more. It would seem to me to be the opposite.
They come in earlier, and you're paying for their time as part of the design process. So they come in, rather than coming in at bidding, which is almost a year after,
Right.
They're involved for that initial year in a lighter capacity, but there's still a cost associated to having them there.
Okay, but my memory from the high school project is that we saved money by having their collaboration. Your firm and Consigli and Skanska working together. My understanding was that the project cost less because of that.
I don't doubt that, and I don't have a good way to.
Okay, well, your opinion is what your opinion is, but I'm
Clarify.
surprised. I would have expected those numbers to be reversed.
There's savings in the long run. It doesn't show up as far relative to dollar value.
What about the equipment costs and the indirect soft costs? If you started in 2027, how much would they increase? Guess. Because the 12 million's off of the 103, correct? Just the
Yes,
103.
because that would be the escalation on just the construction. Equipping, it would raise. It's not in direct correlation to construction costs.
Right.
So there is typically there's a lesser value. Again, 2022 was an anomaly where we saw those higher increases in equipment. Indirect soft costs at this point, if we were to continue on,
5%?
maybe.
Also, a lot of those soft costs would be, even if you were delayed a year, those would be more of the upfront. Those contracts would be in place well before
The full escalation, because anticipated that, this size project would be between 12 to 14 months to do the design process. So we would be, OPM and architectural services would be in place well in advance of some of those additional escalation items.
Have any more bad news? Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
That's half the cost of the high school.
Yeah. Yeah, but public safety buildings are expensive, right?
They are. There is a lot of robustness, rigidity, and technology that goes into these buildings that doesn't get spread across the area of a high school. So where you get that balance, and this goes kind of into the dollars per square foot, but you're cramming an awful lot, for lack of a better way to say it, an awful lot into a very confined series of spaces. The detention area in and of itself is unbelievably expensive because of the construction that needs to be in place in order to protect the occupants of the detention area, because there's regulations from the state, as well as provide the rigidity and the abuse resistance that those areas undertake.
Jerry, my memory is we brought the high school all in for about $550 a square foot. And as we heard at one of the recent school building committee meetings, was it Neshoba? Is $1,000 a square foot. So it was a lot of money for the high school, but amazingly cheap comparatively.
Yeah, no, it's been shocking to some of the numbers. I've been doing this for 25 years, and I thought we had another 3 or 4 years before we would start seeing triple digits for dollars per square foot. Unfortunately, we're working with the state of Rhode Island where we're seeing, excess of $1,000 into the almost $1,200 a square foot range in a public safety building in Rhode Island. And it's not that they're doing anything extravagant. It's just that's the cost of construction in Rhode Island. We haven't seen that, but we are creeping up on it in Massachusetts.
So it strikes me that we have some major hurdles. One is the policy question of the Richardson School. A second is getting control of the John Williams site from the federal government.
Can I comment?
Sure.
So I've taken this feasibility study and the indication that John Williams was the best site to go after it. So I've been working with Senator Markey's team about acquiring the property, and as Jackie knows probably more than anybody else here, about 10 years ago we were very close.
Yeah.
So I renewed our efforts, trying to pick up where we left off, and I'm pursuing what's called a public benefit conveyance, which is the way by which the military releases kind of decommissioned facilities at low or mostly no cost to the municipality if they're going to be used for correctional facilities or public safety buildings.
Great.
So I am on them often. I've submitted a letter, both chiefs have submitted a letter, I gave them documentation, I'm making every argument I can. Senator Markey's team is very receptive and supportive. However, we're dealing with the Army, and I just received an email today that they started the conversation with the Army, and the Army, the building has what I say Mason lead. It needs some work, and the Army needs to clean it up, if you will, before they dispose of it.
Right.
So the process could take a little while, perhaps longer than we want, but indications are good that we might have a shot at that property through the public benefit conveyance process. So stay tuned, because I've been working that for a few months now, and Senator Markey's been very good, so I'll say publicly, thank you, Senator Markey. I'm going to keep my foot on the gas and see what we can do.
Cool. That's excellent news.
Yeah. Plus, it's a wasted asset. It's not a really good use of it's not a good use of government property. So I'm trying to make all the
What kind of a
argument I
time
can.
frame are you looking at?
Yeah, I don't know, Jerry. It's the feds. So federal government moves even slower than local government. They gave me nothing, and all due respect to my military friends, it's the Army. So I don't know, Jerry. I would say at least a year, 2 years. You got the whole process, and then if they have to do the cleanup.
Yeah.
But I'm pushing hard, and Markey, like I said, luckily Senator Markey's team is on board, and one of Senator Markey's team is a local guy, so he really appreciates what we're trying to do. He's from Attleboro.
Oh.
I forget Michael's last name, but Michael Masseter or something. But anyway, I just want to give you guys a heads up that I've taken this body, this group, and particularly your work, Todd, and using that to make a good argument to get the property, and fingers crossed, but it could be a couple of years off.
And that leads me to the biggest hurdle.
Oh, the money?
150 million or so.
That's a different problem for a different day.
And-
I can only do one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big number. There's no way around that one.
Yeah, and of course, the problem is that our current facilities will not be getting any better. They will need more maintenance. We've already spent money on both stations. We're hoping not to have to spend too much more. But this is a complex problem that's going to require our community coming together in a way that I hope we can do, but it's certainly going to require a lot of education and a lot of leadership to get to the point where we could undertake this. But we've seen your analysis of the buildings. We understand. We've talked to the chiefs. We understand their issues, so this is it's a big number.
It is, and I stand committed to my statement earlier. If it helps, even just informationally, we'll update the group, yourself, Jack, and Mason, with if it was two separate projects and maybe stagger it a year or two. So that, let's say, the John Williams site started, everything favorable, you could put that out to bid in '26, maybe a year, 2 years for the headquarters, something of that nature.
Sure.
So that we can just have that as informationally, what's that dollar value mean? And how does that kind of either help or not help?
Yeah.
Just, I always find having the information, the data available for making the decisions will help. And they help when somebody comes to ask of, well, why didn't we do this as 2 separate projects instead of 1 project? You can share that as well.
I mean, I think the reality too is the way your cost estimate was structured is the construction costs are segmented by the building, right? It's 2 separate sort of construction pieces between the 2 sites. So really, where the cost difference is going to be is you're going to have additional soft costs, right? I mean, it's going to be additional design and engineering. It's good, like to separate them out. I would assume that there's like
Some of it's your cost there will actually result in, again, a little bit of the methodology, whether it's 149 or 149A, and then if it's 2 separate contractors, as I had mentioned earlier, we've got a very similar thing happening in 2 other communities kind of simultaneously right now. The secondary project is smaller in scale as opposed to trying to develop the headquarters here, but they're trying to do that with 2 separate contractors and then realizing there is a benefit to combining them. I think the other caveat I should put in on that is the headquarters was priced as if it was the Union Street, if you would, was priced as if it was the full headquarters. So there's a little bit of redundancy in that estimate that would need some refinement on the overall project to bring those numbers into more palatable, if you would, because if we opt to pull the administration out of the Union Street location and put it in John Williams, right now we have that administration in both locations. We don't need that in both locations going forward, so we need to extract that information from one of those and make that decision kind of going forward. So there would be a reduction.
Todd, are you also thinking because if it was split out and they were 2 smaller projects in scale, you might not need a CM at risk? Is that where you were going, or?
You might not need to do a CM at risk. There may still be benefits, but it's the palatability of the first item to the community, the first item, and then the second item a couple of years later.
Right.
So that, and it's, again, it's all as to what is, your neighbors, if you would, are willing to accept. Do they want it as one big lump or 2 smaller lumps, so to speak?
Here, I have a question. Would it be too much to ask the senator, the other senator, or our congressperson if the Army just gave us a grant and we cleaned the place up ourselves in order to make the timeline go better?
Funny, you should ask that. Mason and I just had that conversation before I came down. I don't know. It's the Army, and I don't know how that may be interpreted. It could complicate the process. Like, we literally just had that conversation. I don't want to get in the way at all.
Oh, no,
I appreciate
I don't.
I appreciate your question. Mason said the same thing, and then I hesitated. So I will see if I can make that inquiry, but
Right, because
yeah.
the question of
to Team Markey, yeah. But I don't want the Army to.
the question of is if it's a demolition and a
Yeah.
rebuild, does that change what they have to do? Right? Is it
Yes.
site like what
Yeah.
do they need to do?
We literally, yeah. It's a fair question. I'll follow up. I just don't want to do anything that may delay it anymore. You know what I mean? I don't want to give anybody any reason to. So
And I just wondered
Yeah.
if, maybe the ARA could be helpful here, because if the property went to the ARA, then they might qualify for grants.
Oh, yeah.
that
Yep.
we
That's on my
might
mind
not
too. Yep.
qualify otherwise, so,
Yep.
it just strikes me that if there's a way to get this done, we certainly want to look at it. We should control the site no matter when we did our debt exclusion. You know, it should, the city of Attleboro should get that site, in my opinion.
Yep. So it's early stages, but yeah, the ARI, I think, it would be probably the better one to get it, just because they have different abilities in the city, but it's early, but that's the direction I'm heading in. Your question's a good one. I will ask it, but like I said, I'm just hesitant to get in the way of the Army's process, so.
Oh,
I don't want to get ahead of the Army, so.
Mason, you're not quite high enough.
I know, he doesn't know any colonels or anybody yet, so. Anybody know anybody at the Pentagon?
No.
I know a retired colonel, but
Well, I'll call anybody, Todd, I don't care.
it's my
Really, but
father-in-law.
she's Air Force Colonel.
I will say
Done
this
well,
much,
whatever.
if it would be, and I offer this as we did right from the get-go from our interview, if meeting with the senator, congressman, whomever, having us at the table with you to clarify anything, help answer any questions, it's extended, please call on us. We're more than happy to attend and help the city get what they need and help expedite this process, because we understand, trust me, I don't like presenting these numbers. It's not fun. We understand every day that passes, every month that passes, every year that passes is an impact to the taxpayers. Anything that we can do to help, we're gonna help.
Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Any other questions? Everyone's sitting there in shock. Okay, do we have a copy of that stick or that presentation or whatever?
I can forward you a copy when I get into the office tomorrow morning.
Okay, and then
I can distribute.
does Mason now have the full final report? Is that what you handed in, Todd, was the full final report that Mason has?
Excuse me?
The booklet you handed, that was the
Yes,
final report?
That's the final report, minus breaking it out as two separate projects as I committed to earlier.
All right, so pending that, we can add that in.
Yep.
Is the final report electronic too?
We'll get an electronic.
Okay.
We gave one printed copy, we will get the electronic copy over to you as well.
Because maybe I can forward that to Team Markey too.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you.
My pleasure.
Good work, Todd.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And,
Such fun.
And Sean apologizes that he couldn't be here with you tonight, because he double booked himself by accident.
all right, so moving on to our other business, we can go back to, are the minutes ready to approve?
Yes, they're the copies from the last few meetings that are in everyone's packet, which were sent out.
So is there a motion for the February 7th and March 6th?
Second.
It would be the 13th, 17th, and first. Are you looking at a different?
I'm looking at the wrong page.
You're looking at the minutes.
Yeah, I'm looking at the minutes. Okay, so let me get rid of that. So it's March 13th, April 17th, and May 1st.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The bills, Mason, what do we got here?
So we have a few for engineering and design related to a couple of our projects. So you see the Wading River, those bottom four for Tater and Howard, that's construction services, and then they break out their construction administration and their design services in separate invoices. So that's why you're seeing 2 months of invoices, but there's 4 separate invoices. So that's for Wading River. And then there's also the Pawtucket Water Interconnect invoices from Waterline, those 2 invoices, and then 1 for Skanska for OPM services for the Willett roof. And then there was additionally an invoice that came through today from Bisco, which everyone should have in their packet, but this is related to the emergency PFAS, the temporary treatment center, and this is our construction contractor, and the current payment due, the amount certified is $266,580.26. So we'd be asking to submit that into the record as well for approval, so that we don't hold up that invoice for another month.
Okay, so that is
That'd be the last
application
one.
number 2 through April 30th, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And all of these are in order to pay?
They are.
Courtney has blessed them as well.
She has.
Okay. Any discussion? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. You want to give us the update on the water projects, Mason?
Sure. If it's helpful, you want me to read Courtney's memo into the record? We just got a memo from Courtney today just because we didn't know how much time we'd have with the presentation. And she intends to come back next month, but I just asked her to do a memo just to give an update. Is it helpful if I read it into the record?
If it's not too long, sure.
Yeah, no problem. So from Courtney to the Municipal Building Commission, as well as myself, project update on Pawtucket Interconnect and Wading River PFAS. So Pawtucket Interconnection, please see attached project update provided by Matthew Pitta of CDM Smith. The attached pictures show the progress of the construction site, as well as the manufacturing of the station itself, which is occurring off-site. June work will include completion of the ground piping, relocation of utility poles, and underground and electrical cabinet work. Still expect to be functional in August, well ahead of the expected scheduled end date of January. And then we do have some photos that we can go through.
Sure. Want to quickly run through those?
Yeah. And then I'll put that up there. On the Wading River temporary PFAS, there was also an email, and these are all attached from Matt Berry, Tate and Howard, with just some attached pictures that show progress of the site. June work will include completion of the building exterior, and they expect the station to be online in early October. And then the Wading River permanent PFAS, council voted for receipt of the SRF funding, or really the loan authorization, in the amount of $35.181 million for construction and construction services for the new plant in Mansfield. The water department has received and reviewed 30% plans with Tata and Howard. 95% plans will be submitted to Mass DEP by the October deadline set by the Clean Water Trust relative to the SRF funding. Mason and I have been working with Tata and Howard for a scope of on-site project management services and expect to have the scope of services ready for review at the July MBC meeting. So just a comment on that last piece. So Courtney, myself, and Tata and Howard, we've sat down and gone through a potential scope of services for OPM. This is an OPM that's coming on a little bit later in the game, so the MBC is more familiar with OPM being on initially, procuring, going through the design procurement with the OPM, and then having them through the entire project. Water facilities are a little bit different. There's certain exemptions related to design. So the design was, and as well as going from the temporary to the permanent, the designer was on site before an OPM. So the OPM is largely going to be for the construction management. It's a pretty big project. So we're looking at potentially bringing them on in the next few months to get them ready for construction.
So would Tate and Howard be providing that service?
No, so Tata and Howard is our designer and engineer, and then we would actually go through an OPM selection. So the Municipal
okay.
Building Commission would be
They can help us write the OPM RFQ?
correct, and we've actually been circulating a draft, myself and Courtney and Karen and Matt from Tata and Howard. So we've actually been reviewing the scope of work and adjusting our typical OPM scope of work for it's sort of a different scope because there's no designer selection for them.
Yeah.
There's different components of the project that we would normally have an OPM do that they won't be doing. So we've been working to finalize that, and then we have some conversations with DEP just to ensure that comprehended in the loan order and the potential SRF funding is the OPM services, and at what point, if they come in for any of the final design reviews, is that not comprehended in the loan order? Is only the construction piece. So we're just getting clarification on that, and then we should be able to move forward. So.
Okay, good. Good. Any questions? So then, carpet at the library?
You want to see any of these
Oh, let's look at the
photos at
pictures
all?
first.
So I believe this is some of the equipment for the Pawtucket Interconnect, is my understanding.
This is in the factory where they're building it? Is this what we're looking at?
Believe so. And we can have Courtney clarify the next meeting, but I believe this is some of the ground piping that would be brought on site. And I know she also sent a couple photos of the actual site work that's been advanced. So if you want to take a look here, you can see basically a lot of the below grade work is close to complete at this point. There's some additional updates from CDM on that below, but making progress. So expected to be online, functional in August. So
Yeah.
Long time coming.
yeah,
Yeah,
2016.
how many
right?
years? 8?
Sorry, that was an understatement perhaps, but it's good news nonetheless.
Minimally.
And then Wading River, a little bit, the temporary PFAS is really just the building, sort of like the, pulled up. So really, this is kind of where they're at right now in terms of the temporary, building structure there.
They're making good progress over
So a
there.
little bit less, less far along, but still moving along, so. I believe even just a month ago, I don't think any of that above grade work had been done, so I'm advancing pretty well, I think, on schedule, so.
Good.
And then, yes, thought we'd give a brief introduction to the library carpeting project. So, I think some people are familiar with sort of the need to replace carpet at the library. It's been previously it was estimated about $220,000 to replace all the carpet in the library. Went over to the library, met with the building inspector and facilities manager and the library director, and we did sort of a couple walkthroughs. It's a pretty extensive project. I think we're estimating about 25,000 square feet of carpet. This carpet's 30 to 40 years old. It's a lot of carpet. There's different, the carpet's installed differently in different like offices and in different, different spaces throughout the library. The floors are all a little bit different. And also there's a lot of furniture or even library columns that are fixed to the ground through the carpet. So it's actually, it's sort of a construction project. I mean, it's an extensive construction project. It's gonna be a lot of coordination between, trying to keep the library operational, what kind of sections do you do it? Do you do it in phases? There's gonna be, moving involved with getting the books out and back in, taking the furniture out, putting it back in, strategy on do you do one floor at a time, like how to kind of best handle that. So, we realized we definitely need to scope this project a little bit more clearly. And so I did reach out to Port Construction Consulting and Mark Zawatsky, and we're looking at potentially bringing him on as a clerk of the works for this project, so that we can have a really strong scope. He's actually done these projects a lot, and actually with other libraries, where they consider it an extensive phased move and replace project. So you actually have sort of multiple subcontractors between bringing in a moving company, bringing in a carpenter. You also need to bring in a design engineering firm to do certain testing, right? Hazardous materials testing, some of the adhesives that have been there for years, you have to go through and do that process. So it's a little bit more involved, I think, than, maybe the initial idea of just replacing some carpet. So we sent down some funding requests to the council to try to get this project advancing. So pending their approvals, we'll try to employ Mark Zawatsky as a clerk of the works, and then get him before the MBC and start kind of figuring out how to best procure a designer, an engineer, and advance forward.
So is this the 1993 carpet?
I believe so. It's about 30 years old, over 30 years old.
Well, it probably doesn't owe us anything at this point.
No, I support this 100%, but the price is more than we
Yeah.
anticipated, so we're trying to figure it out, but it's much needed.
Are they looking at carpet squares or
We're
roll
looking at all
carpet?
different options, potential carpet tiles. I think it's something where we'll dictate some of those options with Mark will definitely help us, and then a designer, trying to figure out what's the best, most cost effective for the city, but also give us the most long-term value. But then also figuring out, we're going to have to assess, like, there was, before the library renovations, there was water damage in some areas. There's going to be some, materials that are going to need to be tested. Who knows what types of adhesives they were using in 1993. You got to go through the process of all the materials testing, make sure everything's good to go when we pull that up, and make sure all the below carpet, the below carpet material is strong as well. So we're not exactly sure what's going to be uncovered necessarily. So we're trying to be conservative in our estimates, but it's a pretty extensive project. The 220,000 estimate is a reasonable estimate for the carpeting, but that's only one piece of the project. So
Mason, when we did something similar at my office, what we ended up having to do was that we hired mucker, the trucker, and so they took everything on half of the first floor and piled it up on the other half. The carpet guys came in, they took the carpet out, they put the new carpet down, then mucker moved everything to
Right.
this side, and then they did that side. Of course, in the meantime, all of us from the first floor had to go up and hang out on the second floor.
Right.
Then they did the same thing on the second floor, and everybody's second floor had to come down to the first floor. So it was 2 weeks of disruption.
Right.
But they got it all done in a reasonable period of time. But so I mean, moving books, moving stacks, moving desks, it's going to be a very involved project.
Right, and so this was one of the reasons for, the idea of bringing on a clerk of the works, someone with experience of having done these large projects, because we want to do it the right way. We want to make sure there's the least disruption to operations over there. And yeah, there's going to be potentially multiple mobilizations of both a carpenter and a moving company. So it's a pretty involved project. I think it's easy to be like, oh, we're just going to replace some carpet. It's not really the case when you're talking about 4 stories, potentially 25,000 square feet, and a lot of furniture that's hard drilled into the ground. So I think it's going to be a complicated project, but it's one worth doing, and I think we've got a funding plan, assuming the council, votes to bless the plan and votes to approve the funding. I think we got a good path forward, so.
Okay, good. Anything else that we need to do other than talk about the schedule?
Should be good to go. We just put a tentative date on there just with the.
Yeah, I mean, July 3rd doesn't make much sense, so July 10th seems like the right date. And just to remind you all that the school building committee meeting in June is the 26th, and then the final school building committee meeting should be July 17th. So until as needed in the future. So just mark your calendars that we've got June 26th, July 10th, July 17th. So with that, I know that the Conservation Commission wants this room. So is there a motion to adjourn at 6:18?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Good work, everyone.